Hi everyone, and welcome to Raidlogging, a new show where we spend time outside of the game in order to improve our game. Today we'll be looking at a fellow guildie of mine who reached out to me and asked if there's things that he could be doing better, and asked to look at his logs to see where there could be some improvement. So he is an arms warrior, and arms brings a lot to a raid. You got a 4% physical debuff, so if you have a heavy physical raid, which we do, we have two physical groups, there is definitely a lot of physical damage going out. So that 4% is super helpful, but you also get improved demo shout, and then you're also getting someone who can thunderclap on some really tough bosses or some phases of bosses that might be very tough, which in Sunwell, the bosses are pretty darn tough. So, where do you start, and how can you do this if maybe you are not that class? So I don't play Arms Warrior right now. So just looking immediately at what Plussy is doing is not going to give me the information that I really need. So he did almost 1600 DPS on Brutalis. And I think Brutalis is a really, really good place to start. So when someone is struggling with DPS, one of the best things that you can do is take a look at how they're doing on a Tank and Spank. A Tank and Spank has far less to do. You're really just sitting there and practicing your rotation for the most part. And Brutalis is that exactly for a melee. So if you address the problems in Tank and Spank, you can start seeing, if you have that rotation down perfectly, you'll be able to bring that to a fight where there might be a lot more movement, there might be a lot more mechanics, but because you are so solid in your foundation, you can end up doing a ton more DPS on those fights as well too. So first step is always address Tank and Spank problems, and then go from there. So, like I said, he's doing about 1600 DPS, but there's not much we can glean from here. There's, of course, going to be things like, are you using cooldowns? Are you using potions? Things like that. You can, of course, see here. But what we want to do is kind of dive in and see what the discrepancy is between you and somebody who is performing very, very well. And I'm going to show you how to do that, and you can do this if you're not the class as well. So like I said, I'm not an arms warrior. You can do this as a raid leader, as an officer in a guild. It's actually not super hard to get some really, really good baseline tips. And in worst case scenario, the character or the player that you're talking to will be able to take those tips and have a better contextual understanding of those. Even if you don't understand the rotation, you can do this. So let's go through the steps. The first is finding a boss. We picked out Brutalis. Our kill was 5 minutes, 17 seconds. Kill time is a very, very important and key factor when it comes to how much DPS you can do. How many cooldowns get off, how long are cooldowns down for. So a 20-second fight or 30-second fight where you'll have your trinkets up the whole time, you'll be able to do your maximum DPS. Versus a very long fight where you're going to have a long downtime period. So knowing that is very, very important. So here's what we do. Let's open up another tab of Warcraft logs. We're just going to scroll down to boss damage, DPS here, and view more. And this is so simple. What we're going to do is find the boss that we want. So Brutalis. Just go to, instead of complete raid, we'll look at Brutalis. It looks like the BM hunters and some Fury warriors are doing really, really well on Brutalis. Hunters are absolutely destroying this. Very, very cool to see. Next, we're going to pick the class because, again, we don't care what the hunters are doing. What we care about is what an arms warrior is doing. So we're going to pick a class, warrior, and we'll go with arms. That simple. Next, there are a couple of key factors when we look to somebody to compare ourselves to. The first one is what rank they are. If you're looking in the top 100, I honestly don't think you can glean much value from this. A lot of the times, these people they either have mega gear, they got extremely lucky in crits. It's pretty funny when we were looking at a paladin in our guild once before. Looking at the top paladins, they've got some insane randomized crit chance, like an RNG parse that did really, really well. So we don't necessarily want to look at the number one parse of all time. And then you want to look at some things like the duration of the fight. And then this big one here on the last column is how many bloodlusts they had. So if you're comparing someone who's receiving, if you look down here, this person is receiving 3 bloodlusts on this kill. A lot of these are receiving 2 bloodlusts on this kill. So that sort of information, it's not quite what we're looking for. We want a really, really close one-to-one comparison. So what I like to do is go down. We either skip to page 2 or even page 3 if we like. And one of the important things is looking at the duration, finding a time that's similar to ours. So ours was 5:17. What we want to do is kind of look through and find somebody. Here's a 5:13. They have 1 heroism, and that is perfect. That is exactly what we want to see. We want to see 1 heroism, just like ours is getting. We want to see a kill time similar to ours. And then, yeah, it's not an insano parse. They're not doing 3K DPS. They're doing 2,400 DPS. Now, a struggle, depending on your class, and arms is going to be one of them. So I already picked out a couple people. I have a strong feeling when I look in here, they're actually going to be dual wield arms. So when we go and take a look at them, oh, nope, they are dual wield arms. I got confused because of the I can't read any of the items names, but they are using a warglaive in the offhand. So a lot of these warriors in the top 100 or 200 or even 300, they might have 2 warglaives, they might have 1 warglaive. Sometimes the gear is just out of control. So if you want to check someone's gear, all you have to do is select the character you want to see in the top left. So here we can select anybody. Let's take a look at their warlock. And then when you go to summary, it's going to display all their gear and what they're wearing. You can see their gems, their enchants, anything like that. You can even see what talent spec they're running. I don't believe there's a way to dive into the specific talents, but you can see, their 40, 21. So some good information here. So a problem that a warrior is going to have looking through here is it took me about 10 times to find someone who didn't have glaives on. So I was able to find a couple of people who have similar kill times, and we're going to be looking at them. So here is a 5:16 kill time. He's doing 2241 DPS, so the difference is, 600-ish DPS difference, maybe even a little bit more than that, so maybe 650 DPS difference. That is a wide gap, but the goal isn't necessarily to reach this person. A really solid goal is to just kind of see where those gaps are and then close that gap up a little bit. So we can actually see what their parse was. They got a 96 parse on this boss, which is exactly what we want to see. If you are someone who's parsing rather low, your 50s, 60s, 70s, there's not a huge reason to go look at people who are doing 99. Because like I said, they're doing some real weird, crazy things. And if you actually see, he's got a 99 for his eye level, which is really cool. So he is doing well, but it's not going to be one of those crazy. He's gotten 4 heroisms. He's got some, he's got both glaives. So let's actually take a look at what his gear is. Okay. Yeah, so he's got Cataclysm's Edge, which, if I go ahead and look at our warrior, he also has Cataclysm's Edge. So when I flip back and forth, I actually see a lot of really, really similar gear, which is great to see. We're not seeing a huge difference. In fact, I'm seeing a ton more strength coming out of our warrior, which is interesting. 861 strength compared to 716 strength. So that's pretty interesting. Might be something that's worth diving into more, but that's really getting in the weeds. We're going to look at big picture stuff today. So now that I've seen somebody who has a similar kill time, who's doing really well, the first step is really just comparison. Let's take a look at damage done and see where the differences are. So, number 1 is melee. They both are doing most of their damage from melee swings. Our warrior is doing 635 DPS. Their warrior is doing 830 DPS. So a rather big difference, almost a 200 DPS difference, actually more than 200 DPS. Nope, slightly less. Slightly less than a 200 DPS difference, but very, very close to 200 DPS just on the auto attacks alone. If we look at the average hit, they're about 2.2k, which if we take a look at ours average hit, it's about 2k. And then there is a bit of a crit difference here too. So that actually is going to close that gap up a bit. If somebody has some RNG crits in there, that can be a big deal. But something that I'm noticing is that the hits are pretty different. So the kill times are almost exactly the same. Theirs was actually 1 second lower, but he was able to melee swing 118 times. versus our warrior was able to melee swing 103 times. So they have the same weapon. And it's possible, if you look in here, it could be something to do with haste. I think this guy does have a Dragon Spine trophy, which does improve your haste quite a bit. So it could all come down to that haste value, but it's definitely something to note. And it's sort of like, if you're a raid leader like I am, getting into the real weeds and saying, oh, it's because of haste might be too much. But just delivering this information, telling them, hey, there is a big gap in the amount of hits, they can analyze their own rotation a little bit better than you might be able to. But it's definitely important to note what the takeaways are. The next biggest damage is slam. So slam's actually making up almost 30% of the damage from Saber here, but our warrior is only doing about 21% of his damage from slam. And you'll see that there's actually a really big difference. So 76 hits of slam compared to 42 hits of slam from our warrior. So quite the big gap there. As far as the hits go, they're pretty similar, 2.5k to 2.7k, but the DPS, 651 DPS coming out of Saber, and there's 335 DPS coming out of Slam from our warrior. So definitely there is a big gap in what's going on with Slam. Slam is being used much more by this other warrior who is doing very well when it comes to DPS. So that is an important takeaway. Next we have Mortal Strike, about 200 DPS. And then when we look at Mortal Strike over here, we're looking at almost 400 DPS coming from Saber. So we see 41 hits out of Saber, and we are seeing 26 hits out of Plussy here. So something like Mortal Strike, which is on a cooldown, has a maximum amount of times that can be used. So every minute, you can only use Mortal Strike 10 times, right? Because that's a 6-second cooldown. 10 times would be the kind of maximum that you look at. So there are more Mortal Strikes that can be coming out in that time frame. There might be an issue when it comes to managing rage and things like that, but the important takeaway is that Mortal Strike is just being used more often in the same time frame. When we look at something like Whirlwind, we see 17 Whirlwinds, 19 Whirlwinds, very similar. Whirlwind usage seems pretty fine. There's not a big DPS gap here. And then, this person is not thunderclapping. They probably aren't demo shouting. That's going to be a portion of it. And then when we look at execute, a lot of executes being used. I do think when it comes to an arms warrior, I think execute actually isn't super important compared to a fury warrior. You can actually do a ton more damage just using your weapon. So maybe too many executes. That could be an issue as well too. But when you look at the DPS differences, I mean, yeah, you gain some DPS from execute, but maybe that's worth spent, maybe that's time worth spent mortal striking or slamming, because we are seeing that really big difference. So this is the first place that we look to just kind of see what's going on with how much damage is being done, how many casts are being done. But the next place is going to give us that information in a really nice and concise way, and it's casts. And casts are going to be really your best friend. It's one of the best places to look at really good players to kind of see where your gap might be compared to them. So we go to casts, and now we can actually see the casts per minute, the CPM. So this is a great way to look at uptime of things. So you can see like demo shout uptime here. You can see stuff like if you're using your trinkets, what potions you're using. You can see if sweeping strikes got used. Things like that are very useful in the CPM or in the casts area. But the CPM gives us an idea of what's going on. So like I said before, Mortal Strike can be used 10 times per minute at max. So you'd never really see someone hitting it 10 times per minute, but the closer to 10 you get, the closer to like perfect efficiency you are, is a good way to look at it. So our warrior is using slam 8.3 times per minute. This is a great way if you can't find somebody whose kill time is like exactly the same as yours. This is a great way to kind of measure back and forth. 8.3 compared to 14.8. So that's actually a really big difference when it comes to slam usage. So right there, I can tell that something is going on here. Mortal Strike, 7.8. So you can see it's closer to that 10 number, but it isn't quite there because using it exactly on cooldown every time, that can definitely be a lot, and it might not even be ideal. Because again, you know, we're not trying to reinvent the rotation, but what we want to do is find someone who's actually successful, and we're just going to steal what they're doing, right? So Mortal Strike using 4.9 versus 7.8 casts per minute. Whirlwind, very similar. And then when we look down here, we can see some differences in consumes. An accidental cleave, spending rage on sweeping strikes isn't necessary, of course. But, you know, muscle memory, that sort of stuff definitely happens when you're playing this game. Death Wish, you can see that 2 Death Wishes came out during that time frame, and it's the same for the other person as well, too. So that's really, really cool to see. Haste potions. This warrior used 2 haste potions versus our warrior. I don't see any haste potions here, so that's going to make a little bit of a difference as well too. And remember, we're looking at that melee damage done. We can see that there is a big difference in the amount of hits that happened. Well, that haste is going to make up a portion of that as well too. Some of those hits probably could have hit, or there could have been more hits if haste potions were used, or if you had a DST. That can make a big deal as well. So heading back to casts, everything else looks similar, but there is one missing item here from damage done as far as abilities cast, and that is Heroic Strike. So 2.5 times per minute, not too many. This warrior used Heroic Strike. Let's go back to damage done here. Now, plus he didn't use any Heroic Strikes during this fight. When we look at what Saber is doing, he used 13 Heroic Strikes, which actually made 130 DPS over 5 minutes and 16 seconds. So that's a lot of DPS to gain from just hitting something 13 times. So that's a really, really big number. But something to kind of take away from this is that Heroic Strike is being used, and that's something that Plussy needs to start using because it's not in his rotation right now. So that is something that you can point out really right away, that there's a discrepancy in actually abilities being cast. Now, the important thing is you don't just look at one person. I brought up another example. This person is Zimrock, 5 minutes, 11 seconds. They actually used Heroic Strike 42 times during this period for 407 DPS. So both of these people did very, very similar DPS, over 2.2k. But you can actually see that the Heroic Strike usage is way different from each other. Heroic Strike is Zimrock's 3rd most used ability versus 5th most used ability for Saber. So there is some discrepancy, right? It doesn't mean that you throw away the rotation or you throw away, you know, whatever Wowhead or Icy Vein says about your rotation, but it's very interesting to see that even with different play styles, you know, less Heroic Strike versus some Heroic Strike, you can get some really major differences in how much damage you're doing. Still though, 130 DPS on the low end, that would be a really nice increase to have. So some of that rage is probably not getting used. You know, we're seeing 18 executes. I bet a lot of rage got pulled in those executes that could have been used for Heroic Strikes or some other damage, and it really would have increased these numbers by quite a bit. So just goes to show you, it's important to look at multiple examples. Don't just look at one person. They might be really good at doing something really weird. You never really know. So both of these people look very different from each other in a lot of different ways. So looking at multiple people is important. The last thing that we want to look at, just as a sort of a brief overview, and I'm going to be honest, it's going to look crazy for Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior might be one of the weirder classes. Hunter is probably one too, with steady shot weaving and melee weaving. But Warriors trying to slam in the middle of their auto attacks means that things are going to look funky when we look at the actual event log. But we're going to look at it anyway because it can help you understand rotation a little bit better. And if you're jumping in as a raid leader or an officer and you don't know the rotation at all, this is a perfect way to sort of formalize an understanding of what a character is supposed to be doing. So let's take a look here at events. So right here in the top right, we've been looking at tables this whole time. Now we want to look at events. And when we're under damaged on events, it's going to show us all the damage that Plussy or our other warriors did to the boss. So you can see right away, I can kind of see an error here. Whirlwind is not super high priority, I don't believe, when it comes to single target DPS. But you can see here that there is a melee, whirlwind, melee, mortal strike. And the first slam isn't coming out till about 21 seconds into the fight. Which makes sense because, again, we already saw that slam was being underutilized. We know that heroic strike isn't being utilized at all. So it does make sense to see things a little bit off. But let's take a look at what these other guys are doing. When we come into the event log, it's taking a second to load, so let's take a look at this other event log. We can see that they're starting with a mortal strike first. So we have melee. So again, they are using melees early. They're not immediately hitting any buttons, likely because they don't have any rage. But the first ability that they cast is actually Mortal Strike instead of Whirlwind. So there could be a priority issue here as far as getting Whirlwinds in. Whirlwind was extremely important in Vanilla, but it seems to be playing less of a role, or at least the cast of it don't seem as priority for a lot of these warriors. And then we can take a look at our third friend here. And yeah, they are doing melee, so they're getting 3 hits in. But actually, when I take a look at some of these hits, it is important to take a look. I think this is a Wind Fury hit here because they come out at the same time. So you can see that he actually only autoed twice, and then he Mortal Striked, and then he Heroic Striked. So you can see here that Slam starts coming in here at the 9-second mark. For our other friend, it's coming in at the 10-second mark, about 11-second mark. But for Plussy, it's coming in at the 21-second mark. So Slam is being underutilized, which, again, we already figured all this out. But events can help show us what order people are casting things in. And that's really the important thing. You can see that he melees and slams. Melee, slam. Melee, slam. There's slams coming out after almost every single auto attack. And some of these Mortal Strikes are hitting insanely hard. Almost 5k per Mortal Strike. I'm a little bit jealous. Sort of wish I was playing a warrior right now. But the events log is extremely useful, and when we're talking about a class that is even less complicated, Arms Warrior, again, is a bit complicated. It is a support class, so you are seeing things like Demo, you might see something like Thunderclap in there, but when you look at something like a Warlock, or if you look at something like, there are so many classes, I don't know why I'm naming all of them now, but something like Rogue, so any class at all. When you take a look at their rotation here, you'll get a much better idea of how they are approaching the fight and what their opener is. Openers can wildly vary depending on the fight. So for something like a Tank and Spank, you probably won't see a ton of variance. But when we see a fight that's really, really crazy, where a lot of things are going on, something like maybe Muru, getting an understanding of what people are prioritizing during that fight can really help somebody understand what they can improve upon. So we found a bunch of stuff already. We don't have to go over it a million times, but we found information about Slam. We found out some underutilization of Heroic Strike in the rotation. Mortal Strike can be hit multiple more times per minute to eke out that extra DPS. And using things like Haste Pots are really, really useful to get some more DPS too. So we were able to find all of that out for a class that we don't play, in a spec that I have never played this expansion. And it really wasn't too hard. It can be overwhelming. Warcraft Logs is so overwhelming when you first dive in, but give it a shot. Go through this process with your own class. Pick somebody, again, you don't want to pick someone who's parsing like incredibly. You want to pick someone who's parsing. Let's take a look at what this other person is doing. We have to go back to table. This person parsed a 97 and only a 90 for his eye level. So that is what you want to strive to. Before you're a 99 parser, you got to make yourself a 90 parser. And this is exactly how you want to do it. Find people who are doing good, see exactly what they're doing, and steal from it. I really hope that this video was helpful. I had to do this anyway. I had to go through these logs anyway and hopefully help out Plussy a little bit. So I figured I would record my thought process of how I do it, especially since it's a class that I don't play. And as much as I love warrior, and I am a warrior, well, I have a warrior now. I am a druid now. But I never played arms like this. And slam, I don't think I've ever even hit that button before. So it's really not too difficult to come in and find advice for a class you don't play. And again, this is all surface level stuff. But this could be a gap of hundreds of DPS, going from doing 1600 DPS to doing 1900 DPS. You don't have to match these people exactly, but every little bit that you do helps out your guild incredibly. And if everybody in your guild starts doing 100 or 200 more DPS, you're gonna see bosses. They're gonna be melting. You're gonna be missing mechanics because of that, and the game totally changes when you really start pumping on these bosses. But I hope you guys like this. This is going to be a recurring series. Every week I'm going to be diving into Warcraft logs. If you have logs that you want to, if you want me to go over them, you can let me know. You can reach out to me on Twitter, at The Yip Show. Send me your log. I would love to dive in and take a look at that as well too. I come from a FPS background as well, where things like going over VOD review is much appreciated. It is a great form of improving your game, having someone really good go through your logs. Again, I'm not really good, but logs have a lot of information. So if you do want your own logs to be reviewed, feel free to send those to me as well. And I'll see you next time. And remember, we're raid loggers, so don't log into the game till it's raid night. And I'll see you next time, guys.